There is a moment in history that no one talks about. Not the battle, not the blood, not the king who fell on a ridge in southern England on a cold October afternoon. Those things have been written about, debated, painted, and filmed for nearly 1,000 years. But there is another moment, quieter, smaller, and in many ways far more devastating, that history has almost entirely forgotten. It is the morning after, October 15th, 1066. The sun rises over England exactly as it has risen every morning for 10,000 years before. The light moves slowly across the fields of Kent, across the muddy lanes of Essex, across the wide flat marshes of East Anglia and the stone villages of the north. Farmers open their doors. Women light their fires. Children wake on straw beds and begin another ordinary day in the only world they have ever known. They do not know yet. They do not know that yesterday, on a hillside near a coastal town called Hastings, the King of England fought his last battle. They do not know that Harold Godwinson, their king, the man who spoke their language, who had sworn to protect them, who had sat on the throne of England for less than a year, is dead. They do not know that the man who killed him is already moving, that he is camped 10 miles from the battlefield with 7,000 soldiers who have no intention of going home. England has changed overnight. The people of England just do not know it yet. This is their story. To understand what October 15th meant to the ordinary people of England, you have to understand what England was before it happened. Not the England of kings and battles, but the England of daily life. The England of the farmer, the craftsman, the village priest, the woman who walked 2 miles every morning to fetch water from the well. In 1066, England was home to perhaps 2 million people. Most of them lived in villages, small clusters of 30 to 50 families, surrounded by fields they had worked for generations. Their houses were timber and thatch. Their tools were iron and wood. Their world was measured not in miles, but in walking distance. Most people in England in 1066 would never travel more than 15 miles from the village where they were born. Anglo-Saxon England had a culture, a legal system, a language, and a sense of identity that had been built over 6 centuries. The English common law, the idea that ordinary people had rights that could not simply be taken from them, was already old in 1066. This was not a primitive world. It was a complete world. And on the morning of October 15th, 1066, it was still intact. The people who lived in it simply did not yet know what had happened to it. The first to know were those closest to the battlefield. The villages around Hastings were small, fishing communities, farming settlements, places where everyone knew everyone and news traveled on foot. By the evening of October 14th, some of them had already heard things. The sound of a battle carries further than most people imagine. On a still autumn day, the roar of thousands of men, the screaming of horses, the crash of shields and iron, all of it travels across open ground for miles. Some villagers would have heard it without understanding what they were hearing. They would have felt, without being able to name it, that something large and violent was happening nearby. And then the survivors came. Not an army, not a formation, just men, alone and in pairs, some walking, some barely able to walk, coming up the roads from the south with nothing left of what they had carried into battle. A man with a broken spear shaft still in his hand, another with cloth wrapped around a wound that had soaked through twice already. A boy, no older than 16, sitting on a stone wall at the edge of a village, unable to speak to the people who gathered around him asking what had happened. These were the third, the ordinary men of England who had answered their king's call to fight. Farmers, craftsmen, fathers. They had marched south from London 2 weeks ago with Harold's army, some of them still exhausted from the march north to defeat the Vikings at Stamford Bridge just 18 days before. They had stood in the shield wall on the ridge above Hastings and held it for hours. And then the wall had broken and Harold had fallen and everything had come apart at once. Now they were walking home, and everywhere they went, they carried the news. The news spread the way all news spread in 1066, person to person, village to village, carried on foot and on horseback along the old Roman roads and the muddy English tracks that connected one settlement to the next. It moved slowly by modern standards, but it moved with the particular weight that bad news always carries. People heard it and stopped what they were doing. People heard it and sat down. People heard it and looked at each other across their kitchen fires without knowing what to say. The king was dead. There was no king. And somewhere to the south, a man named William, a Norman, a foreigner, a man who spoke no English and had never set foot on English soil before 3 weeks ago, was sitting in a camp with an army, deciding what to do next. For the people of England, this was not an abstract political crisis. It was immediate, personal, terrifying. The system that had organized their lives, the chain of obligation and protection that ran from the king down through the great lords to the local thane to the ordinary farmer, depended entirely on the king being alive. The king was the source of law. The king was the reason the local lord had authority, and the reason that authority had limits. Without a king, everything became uncertain. And uncertainty, in a world where survival depended on predictability, was its own kind of catastrophe. In the days that followed the battle, William did something that many people do not know about. He did not march straight to London and claim his crown. Instead, he waited. He consolidated his position on the coast. He let his men rest and resupply. And then, slowly, deliberately, he began to move, not directly north, but in a wide arc through the richest agricultural land in southern England, burning and raiding as he went. This was not random violence. It was a message. Every farm that burned, every grain store that was emptied, every village that watched Norman soldiers take their livestock and their winter food supply, all of it was William saying the same thing, in the only language that required no translation. Submit or suffer. The old world is gone. There is a new power here now, and it is not patient. For the people in the path of William's march, October and November of 1066 were weeks of a particular kind of suffering, the kind that has no name because it happened to people history never thought to record. They had already lost husbands and sons and brothers at Hastings. Now they watched strangers in foreign armor walk into their fields and take what they needed without asking. Women who had spent the summer preserving food for the winter watched it disappear into Norman supply carts. Children who had never seen a mounted knight watched them ride through their villages with an absolute certainty of command that made resistance seem not just dangerous, but impossible. These were not soldiers. These were farmers. These were families. And no one was coming to help them. And yet resistance did happen. In some places, English communities fought back. Local lords who had survived Hastings rallied what men they could find and tried to hold their ground. In the marshes and forests of the English countryside, places where Norman cavalry could not move easily, English fighters harried the edges of William's advance. None of it was enough to change the outcome, but it happened. The English did not simply lie down. London was the last major obstacle. The city in 1066 was by far the largest in England, a crowded, prosperous, loud place of perhaps 15,000 people, built on both banks of the Thames, connected by the old Roman bridge that had stood for 1,000 years. London had walls and trade and a concentration of English wealth and power that made it the natural centre of any resistance. For a brief moment, it looked as though resistance might actually organise itself. The surviving English nobles gathered in London in the weeks after the battle. They put forward a new candidate for the throne, Edgar Atheling, a teenage boy with royal blood who had lived most of his life in obscurity. The city held. The gates did not open. But William kept moving. He circled London, cutting off its supply routes, burning the surrounding countryside, demonstrating with patient and systematic brutality that the city could not hold forever. One by one, the English nobles made their calculations. Edgar was a boy. The English army was broken. William had already shown what happened to places that made him wait too long. On Christmas Day, 1066, 10 weeks after the battle, William the Conqueror was crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was conducted in both Latin and English, a gesture toward the people he now ruled. When the congregation was asked to acclaim the new king, the noise they made was loud enough that the Norman soldiers guarding the outside of the church panicked, thinking it was the sound of an uprising, and began setting fire to the surrounding buildings. Inside the abbey, as smoke drifted through the doors and people began to move toward the exits, the archbishop continued the ceremony. William, by the account of those who were present, was trembling. What followed the coronation was not peace. It was transformation, slow, grinding, and total. William rewarded his Norman followers with English land, not small gifts, enormous transfers of wealth and power. The estates of English lords who had died at Hastings or who had resisted afterward were taken and given to Norman knights and barons who had crossed the Channel 2 months earlier with nothing but their armour and their ambition. Within 20 years of the conquest, the Domesday Book, William's Great Survey of England, would record that virtually every significant landowner in the country was Norman. The English aristocracy, the class of people who had governed England for generations, had been almost entirely replaced. The language of power changed overnight. Norman French became the language of the court, the law, the church administration, and the ruling class. English, the language that had been spoken in these islands for 6 centuries, the language of Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and the laws of Alfred the Great, became the language of the peasantry, of the poor, of the conquered. For the ordinary people of England, this meant something difficult to fully imagine from the distance of 1,000 years. It meant that the lord who now owned your village could not speak to you in your own language. It meant that the laws that governed your life were written in a tongue you did not understand. It meant that the world you had grown up in, the world where the king was English, the church was English, the law was English, was simply gone. Not destroyed overnight, but gone steadily and completely within a generation. And yet something survived. The English people did not disappear. They could not disappear. There were too many of them, and they were the land itself. The Norman conquerors needed them, needed their labor, their knowledge of the soil, their skills, their presence in the villages and fields and workshops that made England function. You can replace a king. You can replace an aristocracy. You cannot replace an entire people. So the English endured. They kept their language alive in the places where Norman lords did not reach, in the fields, in the kitchens, in the quiet conversations between people who had known each other all their lives. They kept their customs and their stories. And slowly, over the course of centuries, the Norman conquerors became English. They learned the language. They married into English families. They forgot their French. By the 13th century, the descendants of the men who had crossed the Channel with William were calling themselves English and meaning it. The woman who stood at her cottage door on the morning of October 15th, 1066, watching the empty road and wondering where her husband was, she could not have known any of this. She could not have known that the world her grandchildren would inherit would be both devastated and transformed by what had happened the day before. She could not have known that the English language she spoke, the language that would one day give the world Shakespeare and Milton and the King James Bible, would survive everything that was about to be done to it and emerge stronger for having survived. She just knew that the road was empty and her husband had not come home, and the morning was very cold, and the world felt different in a way she could not yet name. On a hillside in East Sussex, there is a town called Battle. It was built on the site of the battle that changed England forever. William ordered an abbey constructed there, on the spot where Harold fell, as an act of penance for the dead. You can visit it today. You can walk the ridge where the shield wall stood, look out across the valley where the Norman cavalry charged, stand on ground that 10,000 men fought over on a single October afternoon. The ground is quiet now, green and unremarkable, in the way that all places where enormous things happened eventually become unremarkable. There is no trace of what was lost here, and no monument to the ordinary people who bore the weight of what came after. But they were here. The farmer who heard the distant sound of battle and thought it was thunder. The woman who waited at her door for 3 days before she understood. The boy who came home from Hastings and spent the rest of his life trying to explain to his children what it had felt like to stand in the shield wall and feel it break. They were here, and they were real, and the world we live in, the language we speak, the laws that govern us, the civilization that grew from this cold and complicated island, passes through them in ways that history rarely pauses to acknowledge. They woke up English on the morning of October 14th, 1066. By nightfall, their world was gone, and they kept going anyway. If this story stayed with you, if it made the past feel real for even a moment, then stay with us. There are more stories like this one, stories of ordinary people caught inside history, carrying the weight of moments they did not choose and could not escape. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And tell us in the comments, which chapter of history do you want us to find next? Because the forgotten ones are everywhere, and every single one of them deserves to be remembered.